Hello, my name is Aaron. Welcome to Christian County Library's program, Forgotten Women of the Ozarks. We're partnering with the Missouri Humanities Council for this with Connie Yen. We're very lucky to have Connie here with us today. She is an archivist with the Greene County Archives, as well as an author of many great books written about women from the Ozarks and other topics. So thank you very much for being here, Connie. And without much ado, I will turn it over to you. Hello, and welcome to Christian County Library's program, Forgotten Women of the Ozarks with Connie Yen. This is done with participation with the Missouri Council of the Humanities. Connie is an author and archivist for the Greene County Archives. She knows all about Springfield history, and very pleased to have her with us today. So thank you for being here today, Connie.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right, and I'll just let you do your thing then. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. The presentation will be about Forgotten Women of the Ozarks. This is my next book, which will come out, my plan is sometime next year. I've just been gradually finding different women that I found interesting throughout the Ozarks, and so we're going to get a brief overview of a handful of them. And this will all be expanded on in the book, and hopefully I will have many more interesting women to add to the book. So first we're going to talk about Dr. Fannie Williams of Jasper County. It's been difficult to find anything about Dr. Fannie Williams. She was well known in Jasper County during the 1870s and 1880s, but aside from a few newspaper articles, there's not much known about her. I think she may have been born and raised in Kansas. I did find one article that referred to Mrs. Dr. Fannie Williams and her father and brother, all of them in Kansas. The interesting thing is that their last name was also Williams. She was sometimes referred to as Mrs. Dr. Fannie E. Williams, although I've not found a marriage record for her. So I don't know who she married. I don't know when she was married. The only other reference to her being married was in a census record that referred to her as a widow. That was in 1880. I did find one journal article that mentioned her briefly. It stated that she attended medical school at the University of Iowa and graduated in 1876. We do know that by 1877, she was living in Joplin and treating patients. It was uncommon for female doctors to treat male patients, but Fannie Williams did. She treated men, women, and children. And maybe that's why there were several newspaper articles about her treating men, because it was so unusual at the time. Dr. Fannie Williams, who for the past 10 or 12 years has practiced in Joplin, is now located in Carthage. In 1885, Dr. Williams moved her practice to Carthage. She continued to travel to Kansas on various speaking engagements. And in 1886, she was invited to give their Independence Day speech in Garland. I think that was where her father and brother lived at the time. She also lectured for the Women's Christian Temperance Union, or the WCTU. She was their superintendent of the Department of Health in Missouri. They were lucky to have a doctor on staff for that. And this is where I came across Fannie Williams when I was researching Emma Malloy and the Graham murder. Cora Lee was charged with the murder of George Graham's wife, Sarah Graham, and she was on trial in Ozark in Christian County in June 1887. Fannie was with her in the courtroom every day by her side throughout the trial. Now, I don't know, they probably met through the WCTU because they were both active in that organization. They may have even met in Kansas at one time because Cora Lee lived with Emma and George and his family in Kansas. So I found that was an interesting connection.
Oh, definitely. And am I correct in thinking you did write a book about that as well?
Yes. Okay. Yes, that came out in 2018.
Okay, I saw that Greene County definitely has a copy of that, but I'm sure that we could definitely get a copy of that here at the Christian County Library, or at least borrow it from them if anybody's interested.
Oh, sure. And I'll be glad to get a copy for Christian County.
Yeah, it'd be great.
In 1887, for health reasons, Fanny left the Ozarks and moved to Riverside, California, where she continued to practice medicine and continued to lecture for the WCTU. There was nothing specific said at the time about what her health condition was. But she did set up practice, now paying special attention to women and children. Whatever her health condition, she was sick for much of the year in 1889. The local newspaper reported that she was feeling better and hoped to return to work soon, but after what was referred to simply as several hemorrhages, she passed away in November of that year. Again, I don't know about her husband, where his name or where he may be buried, but she's not buried with him. She is buried in Riverside, California. So that is Dr. Fannie Williams. And now we will move to Cedar County and meet the Huff Sisters. Maria Jane Huff, known as Lenny, and her sister Nettie Huff. Lenny was born in Indiana in 1861. Her sister Nettie was born in Cedar County in 1868. So we know the family had moved to Cedar County by at least that time. Their father was a prosperous farmer in Cedar County. In April of 1892, the sisters opened a photography studio in the John E. Hartley building on the Stockton Public Square. They remained in that location, working as photographers for the next 50 years. I don't know if the Hartley building is still standing. I hope it is. Stockton took a lot of damage in a tornado a number of years ago.
Right.
If it's still standing, I'll have a picture of it in the book, and hopefully we'll even get to take pictures of the interior. They advertised a lot in Stockton newspapers, El Dorado Springs newspapers. For the best and latest photographs, go to the Huff Sisters Gallery in the Hartley Block. They were involved in civic affairs. Nettie was elected superintendent of the Junior Epworth League in 1904. That was a religious group in the Methodist Episcopal Church. She was also a member of the Dorcas Society, another religious group, and was a Sunday school teacher. By 1914, Nettie was in her 40s at the time, and she had some form of cancer. She went to Kansas City for surgery and treatment, and apparently whatever treatment she had was successful, because both sisters lived very long lives. They kept up with current technology in their profession. In 1915, they went to a convention in Kansas City. Again, in 1923 in Kansas City, they went to the Eastman School, that would be Eastman Kodak, Eastman School for Instruction for Photography. And then in 1928, they attended a local convention of the Southwest Missouri Club of the Master Photo Finishers of America, held in El Dorado Springs. It seems they never missed a convention in the area.
Yeah, it looks like it.
They kept very busy and kept up to date.
Yeah.
Like I said, they advertised a lot. Photographs for Christmas bring happiness to your loved ones. And a newspaper article near the time they retired in the mid-40s talked about the oldest business, how they kept up to date. Their business had been continuously operated longer than any other business without a change. They bought equipment and started their business over 45 years ago, still owned it, still operated it, were still in business. Their studio was in the same rooms in the Hartley Block for at least 45 years.
Wow.
I do hope that building is still standing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That would be very interesting to see.
More advertisements, a way of acknowledging friendships, keeping school memories. Easels to seniors and 8th grade graduates. So Lenny died in 1957 at their home, 309 East Street in Stockton. She was 96 years old. They had been retired since the mid to late 40s. I looked up 409 East Street on Google Maps, and what I found was a Civil War era or pre-Civil War era house called the Hoff House, which is now an Airbnb.
Oh,
I don't know if it's the same house. I'm hoping it is. I'll be taking a trip to Cedar County at some point to verify, but that would be awesome if that's the same house. Her obituary said the sisters had been photographers in Stockton for 53 years and had been in business there for more than 60 years. I don't know what previous business, other than there were a handful of articles prior to the photography business. I think in 1892, it was mentioned that Nettie had a millinery shop with another lady. That's the only other business I found. Nettie died in 1968 at a nursing home in El Dorado Springs. She was 100 years old. I thought those were very long lives. Long lives, a long time in business.
Yeah, very enterprising.
There is a picture of them on Find a Grave. I have requested permission to use the picture, but I have not yet heard back. But who knows, maybe there's one at the Cedar County Historical Society I can use. Fannie Crenshaw in Greene County. Fannie was born in Tennessee in 1841, moved with her family to Greene County in 1855. She married widower Lewis Allen Dickon Crenshaw, known as LAD. He was a wealthy property owner. They married in 1867. He was a widower, had several children by a previous wife, and together they had 7 more. Unfortunately, she was widowed in 1884 and left with a lot of children to raise and a probate to sort through. She took the executors to court because they were trying to take property that she said was hers alone. This was their estate. South end of Springfield is where it was. The building is long since gone, unfortunately, but it was quite an estate. This is the location, if anyone's heard of the Keat kidnapping, I believe in 1917 in Springfield. Baby Lloyd Keat was kidnapped from his parents' home and taken to the Crenshaw house. The kidnappers, this was a derelict building at the time. No one had lived there for years. This is where the kidnappers hid out and gave the baby what they claimed was an accidental overdose of laudanum. The baby died and they dumped his body in the cistern on the property. That's where the baby was found. Fannie's portrait, along with that of her husband, LAD, were painted by George Caleb Bingham. And the portraits are held by the Springfield Art Museum. She was known in the Springfield area as a pioneer suffragist who advocated for votes for women since before the Civil War. She was active in social circles, as most prominent women were at the time, attending all kinds of parties, hosting parties. She was involved with the Daughters of 1812. In 1902, she was a member of the WCTU. That was quite common at the time. She hosted a WCTU meeting in her home, attended by Carrie Lee Carter. Carrie Lee Carter wasn't from the Ozarks, but she traveled throughout the Ozarks at the early part of the century, preaching about the temperance movement.
Oh, yeah.
And
was she the one that with the axe that she would break in?
That was Carrie Nation.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That was Carrie Nation.
Okay.
Another Carrie, yes.
Forgive me.
The State Historical Society did a podcast about her, about Carrie Lee Carter, that is available to listen to on their website.
Interesting.
Yes. In 1913, Fannie attended a meeting in Springfield of the Missouri Equal Suffrage League. There was a big newspaper article about her. She was described as the pioneer suffragist of Springfield and an honored guest of the club. She said she had been a proponent of equal suffrage since she was a little child and had never feared the ridicule which came to the women of an earlier day who desired the vote. She claimed to have been acquainted with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And perhaps at some point I'll be able to find record of her attendance at a suffrage convention where they were also in attendance. Mrs. Fannie Crenshaw, pioneer suffragette.
Oh, interesting.
At that meeting, she told of how she had once tried to vote in Springfield, along with 4 other women friends. They decided that as taxpayers, they had the right to vote. So they went to the polls to vote on a local tax levy, claiming the privilege as their constitutional right. They were turned away, not permitted to vote. Fortunately, they didn't get arrested like Susan B. Anthony did when she tried to do the same thing. Years later, she laughed about it. She said, of course, they didn't let us in. She said laughingly in recalling the event, but I hope it set some of the voters thinking. She continued to advocate for suffrage and said in 1913, I hope I don't have the same fate of Susan B. Anthony to work and dream and think about the new day and then to die before it comes. Unfortunately, that is exactly what happened. She died in January 1919. Mrs. Mabel Miller of St. Clair County. She is so far the only female farmer that I found. She looks like a very determined woman.
Yes, I was going to say, that's quite a hat as well.
Isn't it?
Very nice.
She lived in Osceola. She was president of the Missouri Women Farmers Club. She did a lot of speaking in the area. She spoke at the Rural Life Conference in Columbia and then at a meeting in Jackson County in 1913. In January 1915, she spoke at the Missouri Women's Farmers Meeting in Columbia. She raised Berkshire hogs, and she talked about how to raise them as well as their history from the time they became important in 1825. I think they're still around. I guess maybe now they would be considered a heritage breed. But she raised hogs, among other things. The Pan-Pacific Exposition was in San Francisco most of 1915. And of course, there was a Missouri building. Missouri won 55 medals on 88 entries in agriculture. Mabel was awarded the first prize ever awarded to a woman farmer for her white corn exhibit. She was also responsible for organizing the St. Clair County exhibit. And news of Missouri's success there, and Mabel's in particular, was circulated in newspapers all over the state. It was kind of a big deal for a woman farmer to begin with, but then for her to have won a medal was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And still in December, people were talking about it. She was not only the first woman farmer to win a medal, she was the only woman in the US to win a gold medal for an agricultural exhibit at the exposition. Something to be proud of.
Definitely.
And Missouri won more medals than any other state in the agricultural category.
Well, it sounded like there was a good showing, like 55 out of 88.
Out of 88, yes.
Yeah, that's a big chunk.
Mm-hmm. She was then known as a woman farmer of distinction. And her home life gets a little murky. Everything up to this point said that she lived in Osceola. And now I find that her farm was in Osceola, but she was actually living in Boone County. But the newspaper articles after this still refer to her as living in Osceola. So maybe she went back and forth. Don't know. In November of that same year, in Greene County, the Ozark Fair Association was formed with F.X. Her as president, F.X. Her being the head of the Her's department store that used to be on the square. She was Mrs. Mabel Miller of Osceola, was appointed to the executive committee and was county vice president for St. Clair County. And unfortunately, so far, this is where I've lost track of Mabel. I found a 1968 obituary for a Mabel Miller, and it referred to her as her occupation as an investigator. Well, I did find where Mabel Miller was referred to as an agricultural investigator. So it may have been her. If it was her, she was living in St. Louis at the time. But this is something that requires more research and will be included in the book. Because I would like to know what happened to her. How long did she continue farming? What else did she do? What kind of agricultural investigations did she do? So now we'll go to Laclede County, another Mabel W Cowgill with the Laclede County Sentinel. Well, you find often in newspapers of the time, women were not editors, they were called an editress. So that's what the search term I've had to use.
Oh.
She was around 2022 when she married William Cowgill in 1903. William Cowgill, by the way, was originally from New Jersey, and he came to the Ozarks on the orphan train and was adopted by the Cowgill family. In the 1900 census, he was a printer. His father was an editor. They were both running the Laclede County Sentinel at the time. She was a member of the Epworth League, just like the Huff Sisters were. And sadly, she was widowed just 3 years later. And shortly after her husband died, her father-in-law also died. So this left the paper with no one to run it except her. She took over as editress in the fall of 1906. She didn't stay long. By midsummer next year, an edition included her farewell letter. The work has been one of duty and sacrifice, attended with little pleasure or profit for me. The paper and its business fell to me under sad circumstances when I was overwhelmed with grief and incapacitated by lack of business experience. So Mabel was widowed and was in over her head, but she did her best to run this paper. She thanked the people of Lebanon for their support and everyone wherever the Sentinel was read.
Well, it sounds like she was a good editress.
Well, she did her best. I think she was a good one. It was just overwhelming. And, she probably didn't have time to deal with her grief. She had to jump right into work.
Oh, yeah.
So by the end of that month, W.F. Parker had bought her shares. He was the new editor. And she didn't give up on the newspaper business. She was in Sloan, Iowa, working for another newspaper. But she was writing. She didn't have to run it. And that, thus far, is all we know about Mabel Cowgill. So Mrs. Susan McIntyre, she is one of the most interesting people I've found. She was the first police matron in Greene County. And she is the last woman that we'll be looking at today. In 1901, again, with the WCTU, everybody was a member. At this particular meeting of the Southside WCTU in Springfield, Mrs. McIntyre was their jail and prison superintendent for the area, and she spoke about the need for a police matron. Police matron work primarily at this time was social work. She was concerned about so many boys being in jail for minor offenses and learning how to get into more trouble rather than learning how to do something useful with their lives. So that was 1901. It would be a while before a police matron was appointed. She wanted the job, but so did Mrs. Alice Blood. Mrs. Blood was a well-known Springfield philanthropist, and she offered to donate her time and services to this work of love without pay, asking only for donations. Mrs. Blood proposed that she continue her relief work and take on the role of police matron. Well, McIntyre won. She got the job. It wasn't until September 1902 she became the first woman in Springfield and Greene County to be a police matron. It was endless work. And some of the work probably was the same as she did with the WCTU. She visited prisoners. She helped find food and medical care for people. She went to court with juvenile prisoners and the women prisoners. She helped people get home to other counties. One of the jobs was to go to the train depots and see if people got off the train who didn't have any money to get home or needed any kind of help. And this job was unpaid.
Hmm.
She occasionally petitioned the county and the city to give her money. Sometimes they said yes, sometimes they didn't have funds to give her. She got a little bit of money from the WCTU, but mostly she spent a great deal of time begging people for money to help cover the costs associated with her work. And the Springfield Republican reported that Mrs. McIntyre is one of the busiest women in town, and she is continually besieged by people looking for help. And that was quite true. She turned in a report to the mayor monthly of her work, as all the police matrons typically did that followed her. And it was just an endless list of the people she helped and the money required to do it.
How interesting. Oh.
In February 1903, she was finally granted a salary, but barely a year later, she was out of a job. The city decided they did not have the funds to pay her, so they just repealed the ordinance that created her position. So back to square one. She continued to advocate for the position, as did Mrs. Blood, the WCTU, even the local police officers. They said that she was a big help to them in the community. But somehow they still did not appoint another police matron until 1910. And this is an interesting story. In 1910, the mayor was Robert E. Lee. He agreed to appoint a police matron. He appointed Kate Cousins, who was new to town. They had nowhere to put her office, so they put it in his office. Within, I think, 3 months or so, they were married. Within a week, he had skipped town. And as soon as he came back, he filed for divorce.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And so she finally left town. Turns out she was pregnant. Based on his probate record, he did acknowledge the child, but I don't know that he ever had anything to do with the child. There was quite a scandal associated with this, and it can all be found on my website at ozarkshistoryjournal.com. And if you know of any women who would be a good fit for this presentation, for this book, I would love for you to email me at Connie Yen at ozarkshistoryjournal.com. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Connie. Thank you so much for bringing to light all of these women. I'm glad that we were able to learn a bit more about them. I can't imagine all the work that goes into trying to find all of this information, to piece it all together. But it sounds like you've done a lot with that.
Well, women are hard to find, particularly women, of course, because they're forgotten. That's why they're hard to find. And for the most part, I've stumbled across all of these randomly. A friend told me about the Huff Sisters in Cedar County. I stumbled upon the whole police matron thing by accident. Of course, Fanny Crenshaw, we have her husband's probate record at work. That's how I found out about her.
Right.
So that's why if anyone knows of anyone who could be included, I would love to find out about them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm sure we'll have this up here for any of our patrons. If you know of any history in Christian County or beyond in the Ozarks, I'm sure Connie would love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Connie, for being with us today. And hope you've enjoyed watching. If you have more interest in our programming here at Christian County Library, be sure to check our calendar of events, and we have all kinds of things like this happening along. So thanks again, and thanks for watching. Bye.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. All right. Thank you everyone for watching this program with Connie, Forgotten Women of the Ozarks. If you have any interest in other programs from Christian County Library, you can find those on our website. If you go to christiancountylibrary.org and check our calendar, we have all kinds of events happening over Zoom. You can find things as well as on our Facebook and YouTube page. So thanks again for watching. Bye.